Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the story of one of history's most terrifying, fascinating, and honestly, utterly complex figures. I want you to just close your eyes for a second and transport yourself to the smoldering ruins of Damascus in the early spring of 1401. The air is absolutely thick with smoke, ancient structures have literally been reduced to ash, and the architects of all this destruction? They belong to a massive, unstoppable army sweeping in from Central Asia. 10 to 20 million. Demographers and military historians estimate that this staggering number is the death toll resulting from the sweeping military campaigns of the man we're looking at today, Timur. You can almost see the ashes of the destroyed Umayyad mosque drifting through the air right now. And I mean, this wasn't just standard warfare for the time. This was annihilation on a scale that humanity had rarely ever seen. One historical account from the time captures this nightmare perfectly, calling it a day that will live in infamy in Syrian history, burning everything in sight, enslaving and killing tens of thousands. That was the sheer devastation and terror inflicted by the founder of the Timurid Empire. He literally brought the greatest cities of the Middle East and Asia to their knees. But to understand the terrifying height of his power, we really have to look at where he came from. So let's get into part 1, Rise of the Iron Lord. From cowshed to conqueror. Now, to understand this warlord, we have to trace how he started from the absolute bottom. He wasn't born a king, not even close. He emerged from the chaotic, collapsing remnants of the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia. Born around 1336 near modern-day Shaharsabs, local legend actually says he came into the world with blood on the palms of his hands. A pretty ominous sign of what was to come, right? His early years were anything but glamorous. In the early 1360s, he was just a minor raider, and he was actually captured and spent 2 miserable months detained in a rat-infested cowshed. But the real turning point? That hits in 1363. During a skirmish, he's struck by a volley of arrows. He ends up losing 2 fingers on his right hand, and his right leg is deeply permanently damaged. He literally had to crawl to safety. This crippling injury is what earned him the infamous nickname Tamer the Lame, which later morphed into Tamerlane. But instead of stopping him, those injuries seemed to forge this absolute iron determination. By 1370, he had conquered the ancient city of Samarkand and established his very own empire.
Moving on to part 2, the Sword of Islam, legitimizing an empire.
You know, seizing power is one thing, but actually keeping it and legitimizing it in 14th century Central Asia, that is a completely different puzzle. Timur used immense political cunning through a few very calculated steps. To rule a Turkic-Mongol confederacy back then, you absolutely needed a connection to Genghis Khan. Timur wasn't a direct descendant, so what does he do? He simply manufactures the connection. First, he installs a puppet descendant of Genghis as the nominal Khan. Then, he marries a woman named Sari-Mul Khanum, who is a genuine descendant, which lets him claim the royal title of son-in-law. Finally, he needed that religious authority, so he just proclaims himself the Sword of Islam. Paradoxically, though, this self-proclaimed holy warrior spent the vast majority of his career unleashing his devastating armies against fellow Muslims across the Middle East. And when we talk about his armies, we are talking about a terrifyingly massive war machine. Take the Battle of Ankara in 1402, for example. Timur commanded an estimated 140,000 men. To put that into perspective, this wasn't just a horde of cavalry. It was basically a highly organized, mobile city. The army traveled with massive auxiliary trains. We're talking herds of livestock for fodder, immense brigades of blacksmiths literally repairing weapons on the move, and engineers ready to besiege absolutely any fortress that dared to stand in their path. And this army was used as an instrument of unparalleled psychological warfare. He unleashed horrors that are honestly hard to even wrap our heads around today. In Sivas, he ordered 3,000 prisoners to be buried alive. In Baghdad, after a local rebellion against his rule, his forces constructed 120 gruesome towers using the decapitated heads of 90,000 people. And in Delhi, he unleashed a massacre so profound that it took the entire city a full century to recover. He brought unstable neighboring empires to their knees, not just through tactical brilliance, but through absolute, paralyzing terror. This reputation for calculated dread spread like wildfire, reaching all the way to Europe and famously inspiring Christopher Marlowe's 1587 London stage play, Tamerlane the Great. The play immortalized his chilling siege tactic, the 3-day tent system. Here's how it worked. On day 1, outside of a siege city, Timur's forces would pitch white tents, signaling that if the city surrendered right then, everyone would be spared. On day 2, red tents appeared. That meant all men of fighting age would be killed. On the 3rd day, if the city was still resisting, black tents were pitched, and that meant no one would be spared. Complete slaughter. Which brings us to part 3, the creator, the Timurid Renaissance. Now this brings us to the greatest paradox of Timur's entire life. How do we even begin to reconcile these two realities? On one hand, you have the destroyer, a man who razed great cities, built towers out of human skulls, and ended millions of lives. But on the exact same hand, you have the creator. This identical warlord obsessively funneled the vast wealth of his conquests back home to build immense, breathtakingly beautiful turquoise-domed mosques. He funded advanced schools for mathematics and astronomy. He fiercely patronized artists, poets, and scholars. This bizarre paradox birthed what historians now call the Timurid Renaissance. It was this stunning golden age in the 14th and 15th centuries. Because Timur conquered so many diverse lands, he essentially forced the greatest minds and artisans from all over the known world back to Central Asia. This uniquely united Mongol, Turkic, Persian, and Arab arts and sciences. It gave rise to incredibly intricate geometric tile mosaics, beautiful Persian-style miniature paintings, and even a complex new variation of chess. And the wealth that flowed into his capital of Samarkand was just staggering. He commissioned monumental architecture, like the Gur-e-Amir Mosque, which was crowned with this massive 30-meter high dome. And because his empire was so vast and strictly controlled, merchants actually enjoyed safe, continuous passage across the Silk Roads. When the Castilian ambassador Rui González de Clavio visited in 1404, he was absolutely awestruck. He documented lush melon orchards, an endless abundance of silk, and noted that Samarkand's population had swelled to 150,000 people. That was literally twice the size of London at the time. To truly grasp his absolute power and wealth, look no further than the autumn of 1404. Timur hosted a massive Kurultai, which is a traditional council and celebration, in the meadows outside Samarkand. It lasted a full 2 months. Thousands of local leaders gathered in giant tents for a lavish, wine-soaked festival celebrating his string of victories. It was an astonishing display of excess, taking place right before he intended to launch his final, most ambitious campaign against the Ming dynasty of China. This leads us to our final section, Part 4, a legendary, cursed legacy. So Timur actually never launched that final campaign against China. He fell ill with a severe fever and died in February 1405. While his immediate empire eventually fragmented through a series of civil wars, his cultural and architectural spark did not die. And this brilliantly illustrates how history echoes. Over a century later, in 1526, his great-great-great-grandson Babur, who is known as the Tiger, conquered Delhi. He went on to found the great Mughal Empire in India. Through Babur, the distinct Timurid architectural style developed in Samarkand was carried south, eventually laying the very groundwork for world wonders like the Taj Mahal. But perhaps the most cinematic part of Timur's legacy is the eerie legend of his curse. It was said that anyone who disturbed his tomb in Samarkand would bring total destruction upon themselves. The series of events that actually followed is truly wild. In 1740, the Persian ruler Nader Shah took a jade slab from the tomb. Soon after, his son fell deathly ill and only recovered when the stone was finally returned. But it gets crazier. In June 1941, a Soviet anthropological team led by Mikhail Gerasimov opened the tomb, completely ignoring the warnings of local elders and an alleged inscription threatening vengeance. Just days later, Nazi Germany launched its catastrophic invasion of the Soviet Union, leading to tens of millions of deaths. The Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin was reportedly so spooked by this that he ordered Timur's remains to be given a formal Islamic reburial in November 1942. Right around that exact time, the Soviets miraculously turned the tide of World War II at the Battle of Stalingrad. Coincidence? Probably. But wow, what an unforgettable story. Which brings us to a final uncomfortable question. How do we remember him? Was Emperor Timur simply a brutal, murderous warlord who left a trail of millions of corpses and skull towers in his wake? Or was he a highly sophisticated architect of civilization? A patron of the arts whose empire bridged cultures and sparked a vibrant renaissance? The uncomfortable truth of history is that he was entirely both. I'll leave you to wrestle with the unforgettable paradox of the Iron Lord. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.